Welcome to the 10th episode of the God and Game Theory podcast. We learn how to break free from the shackles of this world because heaven on earth can be found, and that's why I am here to help you find it. My name is Tom Peterson, and I really appreciate you being with me on this episode today. Because in this particular video, I'm going to be discussing Satan's psychological warfare and how that applies to the universal law of divine polarity. So I would stick around for this one because the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding you will gain from this video more likely will not find anywhere else. So let's get right into it. In the prior video, I discussed universal law and how that applies to most anything in life. I discussed how universal law of divine polarity is the universal law of good and evil, which would be God, the ultimate creator, and Satan, the ultimate destroyer. Now, what Satan can do and what Satan does is he utilizes weapons. So consider this to be spiritual warfare between God and Satan. But between Satan and us, it actually becomes psychological warfare. And so Satan utilizes these weapons here to psychologically have war with us, okay, so that he can pull us away from our Creator and pull us towards him, the destroyer. See, because he cares nothing about us at all. And that's the big difference between God and Satan. Obviously, God is our creator who cares tremendously about us as his children. But we are not the children of Satan, and Satan could care less about us. But in the process of trying to pull us away from God and trying to win us over, he will utilize his weapons in order to do that. So what I'm going to do in this video today is I'm going to be discussing his weapons, and I want to go over this and just do a comprehensive video on this today because I'm going to be utilizing this for future videos. It also applies to the last video, episode 9. So if you haven't watched episode 9, make sure you check that out because that does apply to this. And I really thought it would be best to just give you an overview of this before I start getting into other videos that apply to this, because you having this knowledge as a whole is going to be very beneficial to you moving forward, not only in terms of understanding the videos, but also just in your life on this earth, given the fact that we are still in Satan's little season. And because of the season that we are in, Satan is trying to utilize as many weapons as he possibly can. And he is trying to do as much as he possibly can with the weapons that he has because he knows his time is running short. So let's get on with it. I'm going to start over here with the perversion. Okay, so perversion is a weapon that Satan utilizes, and this can apply to words. And so, for example, in the last video, I talked about the word Israel that comes from the Hebrew word Yisrael. And in the process of translation, because Hebrew is ambiguous, here's how he uses weapons. Since Hebrew is an ambiguous language, he then is able to translate through translation, take the word Yisrael, convert it to Israel, and then have it mean something other than the original intention of God. And so that really is what has happened with that word, not only in Scripture, but in other books as well, and in the world in which we live. And then there's also something called redefinition. That would be giving the word a new definition, not just perverting the definition of the word, but actually giving it a new definition altogether. And so an example of that would be the word Gentile or even Jew. So if we're going to talk about Jews and Gentiles, which I'll get into in the next video, I'm not going to cover it in great depth today. But the word Jew actually came from, it was to define or describe those who came from the tribe of Judah. Okay, and then Gentile actually came from the Hebrew word goy, which meant nation. So these nouns, Satan loves to corrupt these nouns, especially, these that are in the Bible, because they can be a person, place, or a thing. And he'll change something that's specific to a person into a place. He'll change something that's, maybe a place into a person. Now, the interesting thing about the word nation, in biblical times, it did not mean a nation state. Nation states didn't exist at that time. That came about after the end of the millennial reign. So a nation at that time was a community or a tribe. And you could probably at this point in time already thinking, wow, this is getting complicated. Yes, and that's the whole idea, is he makes things complicated, he muddies the waters, and then that's how obviously he's able to do his work. Now, let's get into identity and talk about that a little bit, because this is another one that plays in with the Jews and the Gentiles. The identity of a Jew. So what really identifies a Jew? Well, there's a lot of things that can identify a Jew. I could say, if I'm a secular Jew, or I want to be a secular Jew, I could say, through identity, which is on here, that I'm a Jew. And then I could say that I'm a secular Jew, and I could put myself in that particular category. So that is just a way of Satan utilizing identity to create this perversion of who am I really, okay? And so then the other thing about that, and so that would also apply to religion, Judaism. I'll get into that further. It would also apply to nation states. So we have identities. So now we have states, nation states that have identities. All of this is done really to just create disconnection from each other and of God, because that's the power. We have the power of God within us. That is what Israel means. And as humans, we have the power collectively when we're connected together that overrides anything that he can do. So he's always trying to separate us from one another, and he's always trying to separate us from God. So just remember those two things, because that's what his end goal really is. And there's obviously other things, but I would say those are the two most important or critical components of this. And then let's talk about symbols, because Satan loves to use symbols as part of his arsenal. And I'm just going to give you a quick example here. So this is the Torah. I ordered this on Amazon because I was obviously very curious about it. And I knew I wasn't going to get the real thing, okay, because the real thing is in Hebrew. And so that, again, goes into the concealment. We'll get to that, okay? So the real Torah is concealed in a language that we don't understand. This is the English Torah, which apparently is, and I haven't read it to confirm, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, right? And that's what we've always been led to believe, that this religion of Judaism is an extension of the Old Testament. But this is interesting. If you look here, look at the satanic symbolism right here on the front of this book. And what I mean by that is it's very subtle, okay? This is a 9-candle menorah instead of 7. See, the original menorah had 7. That was the original creation, but Satan modified it to be 9. Then he placed the 6-pointed star right dead center in the middle of this, which is a satanic symbol. So this symbolism is actually used in black magic, occult get-togethers, you name it. So this is not, again, what you might think it is. Now, the other thing is, you look at the inside, it's full of 6-sided stars, full of them. So even before you get to the contents, there has been satanic symbolism essentially put in front of you, so that what that does is it becomes a soul trap. And you don't even realize this is a soul trap before you even open up the cover. But that's what he does with symbolism. And that's why symbolism is so important to him. And that's why he uses so much of it in what he does. And that's just one example. We'll talk more about that in the next video. Okay, so I want to move on to polarization, because polarization is the fracturing. That's the fracturing of the human race. So when you think about the word humanity, it's human unity. So it's 2 words put together as one. That's where humanity came from, is unification of humans. The unity of humans is humanity. But what he has done is he has fractured that through polarization. And that is through polar opposites. Okay, so when you have good and evil, you have essentially 2 poles. Okay, and what he loves to do is he loves to polarize those 2 poles so that they can't be, there's no balance. Okay, so the polarization, there's no balance. It's extreme polarization. And so he does this through division. And I've talked about that a lot on the previous videos. The difference between division and how he utilizes his matrix over here to create division as opposed to connection. So all of these things that he does, in large part, are designed to create division from something. Okay, us and God, us and each other, many other things. Now we get into identity. So now the identity here under polarization, we already had identity under perversion, and sometimes there's crossover here, but under the polarization, the identity would be, well, you're a race. You're either black or you're white. What does that do? It immediately divides us. Okay, so nations, are you communist or are you capitalist? Are you allies or are you not? So this identification of everything creates the division on so many levels. And so that is really goes also hand in hand with labeling, because when you can be labeled as something, given an identity, and that label or identity then creates a division because now you've been labeled as such. We'll get into that more as I get down there. But again, this is just another component of polarization and division by placing an identity on something. Jews and Gentiles, those are identities that become polar opposites. There's no common ground between the two. Again, that's just an example. And then we have extremism, because extremism is always going to create division. And a perfect example of this would be a terrorist, right? An extremist who is a terrorist. So what does a terrorist do? Creates a lot of division between, let's just say, Muslims and Christians, for example. If you have Muslims who are terrorists, very extreme, then obviously you think about the word terror, fear. Okay, so you have somebody who is all about creating fear. An ist is a person who creates something or who is something. So a terrorist creates fear. So certainly that then becomes our enemy, because the enemy is creating fear. And then if the enemy happens to be associated with, through identity, a particular group, then obviously that creates division. So you can see all of these ways in which he utilizes different schemes and plans and ideas, very deceptive, to ultimately accomplish the end goal. And then we have narratives. So narratives are very, very popular, because the Satan will create a narrative. Let's just say an uprising, for example. Let's just say there's a protest in the streets. Let's say that there's a riot or something of that nature going on that is specific to a group of people. Okay, and then what's going to happen is you're going to have this other group of people that's going to divide the groups, because who's protesting? The people that are protesting, or the group that's protesting, is protesting against another group or people. Boom. That narrative automatically creates division. And so the No Kings protests, just an example. As an example, paid protesters, paid by Satan and his armies to go out and protest to create division. So Satan even has gone so far, because money is power, right? He utilizes the power of money to literally pay people to create division amongst humanity. And then, of course, we have sex, which would be male and female. And I've talked about this in other videos before. The thing about dividing male and female, that's the core of our human unification, because that is the divine masculine and the divine feminine coming together as one. So if there's anything that there's nothing he wants more than to divide men and women, because that is the divine unity. And that is the masculine and feminine coming together as one, which is the way God designed it to work. See? So we're going to move on from polarization, but you kind of get the idea of what it is designed to do to the human race, which is completely leave us disconnected from one another, hating one another, against one another. What I would say, in game theory would be an example is a zero-sum game. So in a zero-sum game, there's only one winner and one loser. There is no way to come together for a win-win. See, and he loves to use the zero-sum game in the polarization so that you can never have a win-win. That is not a thing. It's always one side against the other, and there's only one winner and there's only one loser, and it's just always that way. Okay, let's move on to the ambiguity and the concealment. So these sometimes are combined, and then sometimes they're separate. Now, we talked about the ambiguity with relation to word perversion in episode 9. Now, this can also, in an extension of that, be related to religion, which, again, I'm going to go back to Judaism, because that's what I'm going to be covering. But Judaism is very ambiguous as a religion, because if you look at where it supposedly started in the Old Testament, the first 5 books. But then after that, it becomes very ambiguous as to what it really is. And it's that way for a reason, because there's a lot of concealment to create the ambiguity. And what I mean by that is there are many other books. There's the Mishnah, there's the Talmud. There are other books or extensions of this book that we don't have, that are concealed because they're concealed in a language that we don't understand. So we don't have access to that information. Okay, and then it's also very ambiguous because people are under the impression that this is what it's based on is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which is very false. But because it's ambiguous, people don't really truly understand everything behind that, because this is what they see. Well, unless, of course, they see the symbolism, and then they might get a different idea about this. But you get my point on that. And then dilution is another thing, too. So let's talk about how dilution would work with regard to ambiguity and concealment. And this is perfect. So let's take the word Jew. So if Satan was going to conceal his army within a group of people, he would want to find a group of people that the name is ambiguous, right? Because what makes a Jew a Jew? It can be a lot of things. It's not just the fact that they are an extension of the original tribe from Judah. No, it's much more than that. You have those who identify as Jews because of their religion. You have those who identify as Jews because they want to. You have those who identify as Jews because of their heritage. You name it. And that creates the ambiguity. And it also creates the concealment. So that's the thing that we need to be paying attention to there. Now, the labeling here is very interesting because, again, this can, with the other labeling here, they kind of go, they have a crossover, like I said. But with this particular labeling, I just want to make sure I point out a couple things, because this applies to that as well. So if you're called an anti-Semitic, right, you're called an anti-Jew or a Jew hater, whatever you want to call that. And this is the trap, because if a Jew, that whole category is very ambiguous, and then you have an issue with somebody within that category, then you're automatically labeled someone who is, more or less, I'm not going to, I hate to say the word hate, but it's become that. And that's, again, part of what has taken place here. So, anti-Semitism has been redefined, if you will, as Jew hate, as opposed to maybe having a disagreement over something. But the labeling, same with a racist, right? So you're automatically labeled. You're given a label, you're given an identity, you're automatically given that label, which is fairly extreme to create division. So again, all of these kind of go hand in hand with the same thing. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything else on that. I did want to mention one more thing on the dilution. So let's go back to this real quick, because this is something that goes back to the Adam and Eve story. And the Adam and Eve story has a lot of connections with what's going on here. And it's an amazing story, as simple as it is. Because what Satan did with Eve, when he approached her, he diluted what God told her. God told her she would surely die. Satan says, you will not surely die. See? So that's, again, Satan utilizing the delusion almost as an illusion, right? to convince Eve that she wasn't going to die, even though God said that she was. And so that's just from the very beginning of mankind, you can see how Satan was already at work doing his thing. Okay, so then I want to mention, let's go back to labeling one more time. Because another thing that has been really very popular is to label somebody a conspiracy theorist. Now, the interesting thing about to conspire, right, that's to go against. And if you have somebody who's conspiring, they're not only going against, but they're going against in a harmful or an unlawful way. Okay, and so those are very strong words. And so if you're saying that somebody, if they have another opinion about something, or if maybe they're saying, hey, this doesn't quite seem to add up, maybe I have a theory. Well, what Satan has done is labeled that particular individual or those group of people who have a different theory as somebody who is conspiring against whoever, okay, in a harmful or unlawful way. So it automatically gives that label the ability to pretty much say to those, you're rather extreme, and you're really not, what you have to say really isn't of value, because you really don't fit in the category of somebody who just simply says, hey, I'm trying to explain the truth to you, or I'm trying to show the truth to you. But again, that's where the labeling comes in, because I've had people, in my life, and you've probably had this too, where you even mention something that might be in conflict with what we've been led to believe, and then they'll say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's just like, that's the answer. Oh, it's not even validated. It's completely invalidated just simply by being labeled as that. Science is another one. Science is amazing when it comes to concealment and ambiguity, for sure. So let's talk about I don't know, but we could probably talk about a lot of things, but let's talk about the theory of evolution, for example. Okay, so the whole idea behind evolution is, we came from apes, and here we are, and we evolved. And what the whole idea behind evolution is to take God out of the picture, take God's creation out of the picture. Satan destroys God's creation by making it something else. Same would apply to the heliocentric model of our universe. Okay, we're not on a spinning ball being hurled through space, but science tells us that it is like that, right? Science tells us a lot of things that aren't true, especially the science that Satan has created to reduce what God has created. And then we have philanthropy. So that's a very interesting one, because the idea of philanthropy is to give to the needy, right? That's welfare. That would be somebody who, if you're a philanthropist, you're going to have excess money per se that you're going to give to the poor or those that need it, much like the Bible has told us to do. But this is where it's very deceptive. So if you take Bill Gates' foundation, he's a philanthropist with his foundation. He's not doing anything to help the welfare of the people. He's trying to poison humankind. He's utilizing his philanthropy to poison humankind. It's under the guise of something good when it's not. Same with the Clinton Foundation. So if you only knew what the Clinton Foundation spent its money on, you would have a very difficult time probably watching the rest of this video. And that might be something that is disclosed to you in the future here. But these are the things that Satan has done, and he has concealed them under these other words, okay, and convinced you, for example, that science is true when it's not. Okay, it can be, but when he's using it, it typically isn't. So we'll move on to inversion, because inversion is a big one. Inversion is essentially, flipping something upside down or completely reversing it. So that would be, if you think about the polarity of divine law, you have light and darkness, good and evil. And so when it gets into inversion, what Satan likes to do is flip, okay? He likes to flip the good and make it evil. And I come across this all the time because people will question me about my podcast and the things that I say, because the things that I know to be true, Satan has inverted them, okay, so they're no longer of the original intent and they become something else. So let's talk about a few examples. Now, false religions, well, counterfeiting. Let's get into counterfeiting because counterfeiting is an inversion. It's a fake, right? So the real thing, the opposite of the real thing would be a fake. And so counterfeiting, let's talk about false religions. See, because if you take the word religion, then you're led to believe that it is a godly thing. But it's inverted when it becomes false, when it's no longer a godly thing and it becomes something else entirely. False preachers as well. Because if they have the name preacher, you're going to think that it's the real thing. Anybody can say, hey, I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor, whatever it may be, which means I'm speaking for God's sake, right? But there are many false preachers and pastors out there. And I just want to make sure I mention this to you because this is something that came up for me personally last week, where I had a relative of mine recommend that I watch one of these preachers, and she had no idea that I was doing the podcast. She only knew about my book. And I looked him up. It didn't take me long to kind of figure out what he was doing. And I replied back to her, this probably isn't a guy that you should be watching. But again, she, like many others, aren't aware of these preachers who are within Satan's army, who are supporting, let's just say, nation states, okay, supporting certain governments, supporting certain activities, or whatever it might be. And again, you probably can read behind the lines. I'm talking about these guys who are pro-Israel. So you have to be very careful, with these dispensationalists, these Zionists that are out there, many of whom are getting paid to speak the pro-Israel propaganda through the guise of being a preacher. So that's counterfeiting. Now let's think about money real quick. Because if you were to counterfeit a dollar bill or $100 bills or whatever, obviously that would be unlawful. You'd be thrown in jail for that, right? But if you happen to be part of the world banks or the Fed or those who are in the practice of printing money, the money printers, see, they counterfeit money all the time because they're part of Satan's army. That's why fiat money isn't real money. It's money that's counterfeit. And because we got away from the gold standard, and we've got away from the gold standard, that money became very much counterfeit money because it has no backing, because they can just keep printing it at will. They don't get jailed or arrested for that, but that's, again, part of Satan's work in counterfeiting. Now, the other part of this is distortion. So inversion and distortion are similar but different. You can see how they're different, but they ultimately achieve the same goal. So when you get into distortion, there are a lot of things that Satan will distort as well as invert. And so one thing would be words. And so I just want to cover a couple words with you, that would apply to that. So this is going to be the next video where I talk about the Jews and the Gentiles and how we ended up there. And I want to mention something to you with the distortion of words, because that also happened up here in the last episode. But, you can pervert words, you can distort words. And with distortion of words, let's just take, for example, the word goy. Again, this comes from the Hebrew Bible, goy, to describe a nation or a community. Okay, what happened with the word goy to describe a nation, a community? Okay, because at the time there was no nation state, so it would describe a community. That goy word then became something different over time. It became Gentile. Then Gentile became something different. Now, I don't have, the other books here, but in this particular religion, a goy is actually someone who is subhuman, really not even worthy of, being called a human. So that is where we've gone from goy being a nation, or which again, a community, to then becoming a nation, to then becoming a person or a subhuman, not even a person, a subhuman entity. You can see how words have been distorted through time drastically for his purposes. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing something on there too. Well, so again, Jew would be another example of that. Talked about that a little bit more, how that word is distorted to mean a lot of things other than its original intent. Okay. And then we get into truth. So the inversion or the distortion of truth would be lies and deceit. So pretty simple and easy there to figure those two out, because they are truth inverted as lies. Okay. And then truth distorted would be deceit. It can be both, but that's what happens with truth. And then, of course, knowledge. Now, this is something that's very interesting, because I get into these conversations with people who've watched the videos. Because if you go back to the Adam and Eve story, Satan told Eve that she would have the knowledge from the tree of knowledge if she ate the fruit. Okay, and God said, "Don't eat the fruit, because you are not to have this knowledge. I'm telling you right now, this knowledge is not for you." Okay, and then Satan comes along, and what does he do? He tells her, "Don't listen to him. You, by eating the fruit, are going to gain all of this wonderful knowledge. You are going to know everything." And this goes back to Gnosticism. And people will accuse me of being Gnostic or having Gnostic concepts or ideas, because that's the deception. So the serpent, Satan, actually convinced Eve that he was the liberator, okay, and God was the oppressor. And through that sin, that sinful act of hers, he told her that she would be the all-knowing and that she would be liberated, and she really wouldn't need to follow God's instructions at that point. And so that's the basis of Gnostic. The Gnostics literally believe that Satan was the good guy, and that this liberation and not paying any attention to what God is telling us, and quite frankly, just even eliminating God from the equation, because the core concept of this is you become a God in your own right. You don't need God anymore. So that's really the whole concept of this issue with distorting knowledge and inverting the knowledge. And that goes back to the Adam and Eve story. And then we get into the balance. So again, we have this equal balance of dark and light, and there's tension in between. And that's the way it's designed, because if we didn't know evil, then we wouldn't appreciate good. We wouldn't know the opposite, right? The two poles, so to speak. So when that starts to get out of balance, that's what Satan's intention is to get everything out of balance, so there isn't balance anymore. And so he does that by doing a lot of different things. And we'll get into that in more videos. And then the last thing is the natural order of things. So when we talk about the natural order, that can be the biological order of things. So male and female. So you have the trans movement, right? Transitioning from male to female, or transitioning from female to male. That transition is disruptive to the natural order. The other thing about the natural order is after death is resurrection. So that's God's creation, right? That once we die, we are resurrected through the blood of Jesus Christ. But in Satan's world, there is no resurrection after death. And so that's why those who have sold their souls to Satan, or followers of Satan, try to extend their lives as long as they possibly can, because there is no resurrection after death on this earth. Now, we all know that they end up in the lake of fire, but he probably doesn't tell them that. Or maybe he does, and they don't really care, because they're just focused on this world, right? And not eternal life. They're just focused on this life. But anyways, that's his effect on natural order. And there's so many other things. I'm just giving you a few examples of these things. Now, I do want to just quickly cover how it does apply to the devil's matrix, because I've had the videos in the past about the devil's matrix and what he utilizes to keep humanity, the human race, us, within, God's children, within his trap, his prison, if you will. And this is done through deception and illusion, okay, which ties in with all of this stuff that we've got going on here. But the illusion is really the inversion. The deception is really the inversion. This is also a counterfeit world, if you will. It's an illusionary world. It's a counterfeit world. And then the chaos and the confusion keeps us trapped within it. The fear and the anxiety, those make for spiritual bondage. So again, if he can keep us within the realm of fear as opposed to love, And within the confines of chaos and confusion, that is spiritual bondage, okay? Because when we are in that place, in that prison, we cannot ascend. We don't have the ability to ascend. And that's where I'm going back with these other videos is once you get out of the devil's matrix, you then have the ability to ascend. And the beautiful thing about the ascension is it's not to leave earth. It's to reveal heaven on earth or heaven within earth. That's the beauty of ascension, is to reveal the new heaven and earth here that we're building for humanity, because he's going to be gone. But we have to start building that, okay? And so that's why this is all so important. I'm going to touch on a couple other things here real fast. Temptation is obviously a big one, okay? So the fall of man, lust, greed, and pride, those three things are responsible for the fall of man time and time and time and time again throughout history, countless times. And that's the use of temptation. And again, to get away from what God wants of us, much like what he told Eve, Adam, in the garden. Now, then we have trauma. Now, trauma is the really very sick part of what he does. And this gets away not just from this is a thing. A lot of this is psychological. But this then gets into psychological and physical, both. That's where a lot of this is combined. So the abuse, abuse creates a tremendous amount of trauma, which then creates a trap. You can get stuck in the trap from the trauma from the abuse, and that's his intent. And with the rituals, there's abuse at the rituals. Again, that's because there's, I'm not going to get into that now in terms of how that's related to the gods that they're worshiping and everything else. But think about cannibals, for example. The name cannibal came from the Canaanites who were eating their own children. So just again, based on my prior video about the Canaanites and what they were doing during the time in which they were having their rituals, that's how that name came to be. Cannibals came from Canaanites eating their own. Okay, and then you have the separation through trauma. You're separated from a lot of different things. That's a psychological thing. And that's why he creates the trauma, to keep you separated from God, separated from others, even separated from yourself. The suffering, obviously, that goes with that has a lot to do with how he keeps you there. And then, of course, the pain and the torment, whether it be physical pain, mental torment, whatever the case may be. So the trauma trap, if you will, this is what is really the very worst of his devil's matrix, if you will, because this is a whole nother little prison cell that he traps people within the matrix in and of itself. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of all of the things that Satan is capable of doing. And there's more than this, but this really is what applies to the videos that I've done and the videos that I'm going to be doing moving forward. So I want to make sure you had a good comprehension of the material that's on here and start using this in your own life. The beautiful thing about having this knowledge is now you'll have the discernment to then better understand the difference between the truth and the lies and the deceit and all of these other things that he's doing, so that you can identify those things and find your way to the truth. The purpose of this video, purpose of what I'm doing here, is to help you find your way to the truth, because the truth is the light is the enlightenment. It's all part of the ascension. It's all part of freeing ourselves from his traps, and being liberated through God and the Holy Spirit, okay, and being on to him. So I do want to mention, one thing that's very, very helpful, because if you look back here, you'll see I have the shield with the cross, and I have the sword. And those are the two weapons, the only two weapons that you need. And so the shield with the sword is representative of God and his protection. So when you have God as your shield, you are protected by God. That's your protector. That's your force field, your fortress, if you will. And then when you have your sword, which is game theory, then you have your weapon to combat his weapons. So that's why the book and the podcast are both titled God and Game Theory. And so this book was originally written to help you have your weapons, if you will, to fight Satan and his evil ways in terms of what he is doing during the time of his little season. So I do still have some free promos available for the audiobook and the ebook on the website. Use promo code FREE, all capital letters. I've got a few more of those left, so do that if you want to get the audiobook or the ebook. Can't do that with the paperback at this time. You have to go to Amazon to get the paperback or the hardback, but those are discounted at 20% off. And as always, if you can't afford the book, if you want a paperback and you can't afford it, just hit me up on the website on the contact form and I'll get you a copy. And that's really it. I just want to ask you to please share this with others so they can have this knowledge, and give it a thumbs up and a like if you appreciate this material. And of course, subscribe and follow if you haven't. I just want to give a shout out to a couple community members real quick because I told them that I would, and I want to make sure that I have their names straight because they were very helpful, I think, to me and to us by making some suggestions. So I have two Bibles here, and I'm going to get into this more in the next episode about the perversion of our Bibles, the distortion of our Bibles, the other things that Satan has done during the time of his little season to change things up in the scriptures so that they become a little bit more, let's just say, confusing and maybe leaning a little bit more towards what he's trying to accomplish. But one book here that was recommended to me by Finding Courage was the Geneva Bible. So that's one that I'm going to look into, but that's just something, 1560, okay? But we'll get into that more in the next video. And then also, let's see, who else was it? Truth, yeah, here it is. Truth by Yahuwah. So Truth by Yahuwah, thank you for the recommendation of the Matthew's Bible, 1537. I'll be looking at those further, and we'll be talking more about those as we go. But always, please provide your input, your comments. It's great when we can share information with each other. Ask questions. I can give you more information through your questions. And just please continue to share this knowledge and understanding with one another because it's up to us at this point in time to help everyone come to know and understand what's going on here so we can be one step ahead of Satan himself. So until next time, be wise. God bless. Take care. And I love you all, and I will see you very soon.